Mr. Speaker, my questions to the Minister of Finance. Does he agree with Alan Bollard, who said that the economic recovery is proving, quote, brittle, uncertain and full of surprises?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yeah, generally I do. That is generally, that's a description of the recovery around the world. But as I pointed out in answer to previous questions, the reason our recovery isn't taking off is because New Zealanders are saving instead of spending. Now, in the short term, that means a slightly slower recovery. In the long term, it is the right kind of adjustment and means we'll get sustainable jobs and sustainable growth in incomes instead of some kind of sugar shock.
Before I call the honourable member for her first supplementary, could I just encourage members not to start interjecting before the minister's even opened his mouth? You know, it's a little difficult when there's such a barrage of interjections before he's even uttered a word. The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Was one of the surprises to him to learn yesterday that grocery prices rose 2.6% and fruit and vegetable prices rose 6.8% in the last year, just after he'd claimed that food and vegetable prices had actually dropped by 6.5% in the last 2 years? And could that be why householders are not spending their money on frivolous things like flat-screen televisions?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the comments the members referring to were figures that we have used in the House because the Labor Party are overlooking their own track record with respect to vegetables. In the 2 years to September 2008, they're so much better when Phil's away and David's in charge. In the 2 years to September 2008, vegetables went up 21%. In the 2 years from 2008 to 2010, they dropped by 6%.
Order. Now, I think the House has had its fun. A little decorum would be helpful. There's a point of order. The Honourable David Cunliffe, is it?
Mr. Speaker, just briefly, you've previously ruled that it's inappropriate for ministers to spend most of their answers talking about opposition policy, and I'd argue that we've had yet another reminder they can't drop the habit.
Order. The members raised a valid point of order. Ministers should not spend most of their answers talking about opposition policy, although on this occasion he was talking about about past record, which is a little different. I draw a distinction between past record and asserting some policies to another party that shouldn't be. The Honourable Annette King.
Mr. Speaker, was another surprise when the President of Federated Farmers said the government can propose cycleways but they won't get as far, and the situation they now face is, quote, like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
The Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't surprised at the President of Federated Farmers making those remarks. The government is focusing on the competitiveness that our export sector is going to need, and that is why we have a comprehensive program of regulatory reform, infrastructure investment in skills, and changing the tax system as we did on the 1st of October to make sure that this country can earn before it spends. And over the next 10 years, that's what we're going to have to do. Under her government, the country consumed and borrowed and spent before it earned.
David Bennett.
Supplementary question to the Minister of Finance. What was the economy like when the government came into office in late 2008?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, what a good question. In short, it was a mess. The economy went into recession at the start of 2008 when the rest of the world was still growing. Inflation in 2008, inflation was rampant at 5.1%, and that was without a GST increase. That was just purely the product of the efforts of the Labor government. and real wages were dropping in 2008. It is going to take some years to undo the damage.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
To the Minister, Mr Speaker, which of the following is true? That under Labor the economy went through the best of times and ran a $2 billion surplus, or that under Labor it was mismanaged, as he now alleges? And did that have anything to do with a world record low unemployment, cutting net debt to zero and gross debt in half, and running growth for the longest expansion since World War II?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I don't think any of those things are actually correct, but what the member needs to learn is if he did such a fantastic job, why did he lose the election so badly?
The Honourable Annette King.
Was it a surprise when he heard that the number of people receiving the unemployment benefit had increased again, now at 65,281, when he previously stated just a few days before there's no doubt that unemployment has peaked?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as the member knows, the figure that's used in the forecast is the Household Labour Force survey, the same one that actually the Labor government always used. But I just want to remind the member this. The number of people on unemployment benefit was higher than it currently is in 2004, 2003, 2002, 2001 and in 2000. That is, for over half of Labor's term, the number of people on the unemployment benefit was higher than it is now, and I don't remember her kicking up a fuss then.
The Honourable Annette King.
Was he surprised to learn that despite his belief that many supermarkets would be putting their prices up by less than the GST increase, that the cost of items such as onions have risen by 81%, pasta by 22%, toilet paper by 41%, apples by 5.9%, and potatoes by 2.8%, and will he now apologising for not knowing the price of anything or the value of anything either?
The Honourable Bill English.
The answer to that, Mr Speaker, is no. In fact, I know it's very disappointing for the opposition, but all the recent forecasts of inflation and the cost of living, those forecasts are moderating, not going up, despite the fact that the government has increased GST as part of a $4 billion income tax cut. We are not going to see high and increasing inflation.
The Honourable
Mr
Annette
Speaker, was he surprised to learn, in light of that answer, of the flurry of complaints to the Commerce Commission of excess pricing regarding the increase of GST to 2.5% and been attributed to the increase in 2.5% in GST? And was he surprised to learn that Meridian chose to impose 15% GST on people in Christchurch in September, the coldest month they had, which included a 7.1 earthquake? The
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, with respect to the issue regarding Meridian, I understand that there is some discussion going on now which amounts to an argument over interpretation of the transitional provisions. What the member can be reassured about is the government anticipated that the transition could be complex and made provision for businesses such as Meridian to choose the lower GST option.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, is New Zealand's economic recovery vulnerable to oil price shocks, and if so, how?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yes, the New Zealand economic recovery is vulnerable to any kind of price shocks, including oil price shocks, and at the moment there is evidence of increases in commodity prices which would suggest that there could be risks in the future. That is why we have to manage the government's books very tightly in case things go wrong. It is why we need to get on with a program of structural reform and investment in infrastructure, and investment in skills and changes in the tax system, because those are some of the things we can influence that will improve